The wall sang to him in fractures and groans, 1,000 frozen throats sounding low in the marrow. John stood on the parapet while the night burned green and pale above the world, curtains of light rippling like the slow unrolling of some ancient banner. His breath smoked. Ghost pressed against his leg, silent and white as if carved from the same cold that made the world. Beneath them, Castle Black huddled in its own shadows, chimneys coughing thin streams of smoke into air too cold to accept them. He had learned the voices of the ice. The fat crack that meant a surface fissure, harmless for now. The harpstring whine, thin and taut, that warned of tension. The belly-deep shudder that told of age and burden. The wall was a weight you could hear if you were quiet enough and frightened enough and loved enough. He did not know if love counted for anything against winter, but he gave it anyway. Not sleeping neither? Dolorous Ed's voice drifted up the ladder before the man himself, pale and long as a dropped rake. Good. I'd hate to think the Lord Commander had found a better use for a bed than I have. Which is to say none at all. I'm listening, John said, not taking his eyes from the tree line. The forest lapped at the wall's heel like black surf. Between the boles a pale thing moved, and for a moment he thought it was a drifted log turned in the breeze. Turned back. The eyes shone. Then the moon shrugged from a cloud and showed it as empty air. Gods, Ed said. They play peekaboo like children. Children you can't beat for it. Report. Sam sent for you. Maester Eamon wants you as well. The first builder is in an argument with Bowen Marsh, and there's a man in the yard claiming to have eaten his boot. I suspect the last will get sorted fastest. John looked down through frost-rimed lashes. The yard was a geometry of lanterns, their warm circles joined by paths of shadow. Men moved like pieces on some grim board, axes over their shoulders, pitch slopping in buckets, rope coils heavy across backs. Above the old bear's hall, a spire of steam curled into the aurora. Ghost lifted his head and huffed, as if to argue that the man who spoke of boots was the only voice worth hearing. He descended. The ladder stung stiff gloves with chill and creaked in complaint. Men cleared space for him without seeming to, an odd courtesy born more of need than respect. Bowen Marsh stood near the old winch tower with arms folded over his belly, red face polished by cold and temper both. Othel Yarwick, the first builder, was a compact knot of beard and patience, his breath steaming like a small engine between words. And I'm telling you, Othel said as John approached, you drop that section and the ice will take the rest of it down like domino stones. We're not building snow forts here. This is 700 feet of Winterfell stacked on its side. And if you pick out the wrong tooth, the whole jaw goes soft. So you admit it's a jaw that bites? Bowen Marsh snapped. We should be sealing every bloody gate and tunnel, not carving more. Enough, John said. Both men turned toward him like candles to a draft. You wanted me. We need to talk of sanity, Bowen said. If the first builder is still entitled to it. He wants to hollow the wall like a sugared sweet and hope the ants crawl in. Othel blew into his hands and flexed his fingers. Roughly put, but not wrong. If we make chambers in the tunnel and load them with timber, pitch, and chocks, we can drop sections when they're thick with dead men. We've near 2,000 barrels of pitch between the granaries and what Stannis left. We'd be using a part of the wall to save the rest of it. It would kill men too, Bowen said, stabbing a finger toward the forest. And how do we know the dead men die? We've burned them. Crushed though? Pinned? It's no small thing tearing at the wall even for a trap. Wights don't die, right? Othel said, voice flat. But we don't need them dead when a buried dead is as good as dust for our purposes. We entomb them until summer, or forever if the gods are kind. And the collapsing will give us the fires we need. An ice roof falls. Everything groans and burns and freezes at once. Makes a sort of storm that's ours to steer. John looked between them. He had listened to this argument twice now, once with a cup thawing between his hands and once in his head as he lay staring at the rafters with Ghost's warm weight pinning his legs. The plan was madness. It was also the only madness with a map. Sam and Maester Eamon, he said. Where are they? In the rookery, Ed said. materializing beside him like a morose apparition. The birds agree with the first builder, by the by. Or else they're agreeing with me. They just stared at me and shat. So really it could have been either. John left them to it. The rookery door shivered in its frame when he pushed. Inside it was a twilight of feathers and old straw. Ravens blinked down with stupid wisdom. Sam hunched beside Eamon, his cheeks glossy with cold weep and his hair sprung up like a startled hedge. Maester Eamon, blind eyes set in a face like a wrinkled apple, tilted his head as John entered. "John," Eamon said, and smiled so gently the hard day felt briefly ashamed. "You've learned the tune the ice is singing." "I am trying." John crouched by them, ghost slinking past to nose under the straw as if hunting for some buried summer. "How many?" 147 ravens still in our care," Sam said. "I've counted 3 times. Sent 20 to Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower with warnings, and a dozen to the Lord's south. I think the others, they gathered a herd tonight. The way we heard." Ravens clacked. One said, Lord Snow," in a voice like a rusty hinge. John found the bony knuckles of Eamon's hand and took them. "What did you hear?" he asked Sam. "Nothing," Sam said, startled at his own word. "I mean, too much nothing. An old ranger told me once that snow has voices, all the ways it falls and packs. Tonight it went quiet as a church, and then that quiet got louder. The birds stopped their little noises. Even the horses held their breath. I think they're coming to find a way through. They will test us," Eamon said. "They are not men, yet they are not beasts, and they have a purpose as clear as any king's, perhaps clearer. It is not wrong to make the wall work with us." Like a harp stretched to its note, Bowen Marsh's voice grew near with its own authority. He had followed. "A harp? A harp we're to play with a torch in our teeth and a rope round our ankles, Maester." Eamon smiled again, that tired sea-green kindness that made John want to wrap him in his own cloak. "If you had ever heard Rieger with a harp, my Lord Bowen, you might speak more gently of them. But I speak in old man's pictures. Forgive me, the wall was remade by sorcery older than I. It is a gate and a guard both. But holes have always been cut through and men have passed, and once we passed worse than men. We cannot count on the wall's memory to distinguish between the living and the rest without our help. What we count on is timber, pitch, and no small amount of luck," Othell said from the doorway, having trailed Bowen. He tapped a plan he had rolled and unfurled with a gloved fist. "I want to cut galleries off the main tunnel like the stalls of a stable. We put our hogsheads in them, stack kindling, lay iron chains as a web. The main passage we support with big timbers and wedges. Ropes tied high to those wedges. When they get deep enough, we cut the ropes, the wedges kick, the roof falls. We fire the pitch before that so when ice falls into flame it'll explode steam and send a hot wind back along the crawl. Pardon the terms, Maester. I was a carpenter, not a small folk priest." Ghost sneezed in the straw as if approving such plain speech. John traced the plan with a forefinger. The tunnel through the wall ran cold and straight, a blue vein in a mountain. Othell had drawn squares along its length. Little teeth and jaws, as Bowen had said. "What of the outer gate?" John asked. "We need to draw them in. Wights come at the living. They need bait." Ed sighed. "I suppose we could strap on honey and dance. I have the legs for it, Sam. Don't deny me." Sam said, "Noise, smoke, fire they shy from, but not if there's warmth beyond it. We could set a small blaze in the tunnel, draw them from the dark into our light. The smell of meat, dead goats perhaps, or prisoners." "I didn't mean that." "No prisoners," John said, too sharply, hating that he had to say it aloud as if the idea needed killing. "We have enough enemies south without making new ones in our own yard. Goats will do. Have leathers bleed them at the mouth of the tunnel, and leave the carcasses inside beyond the first killing hole. And we'll ring the bell in the timber yard. Sound carries through ice strange. Let them hear it and come." Bowen sniffed. "And what if they come when you don't want them? What if they come beyond the numbers we can hold? What if the others themselves walk into our trap and blow it out like a candle?" "They can't cross fire," John said. remembering the way cold men had shied from burning logs the night at Craster's, when the world had gone mad and stayed that way. They can make it colder, but it takes them effort. Time. In time we can drop 3 sections and turn that corridor into a kiln. If we draw enough of the dead in and bury them, they're no threat. Not today, not for a long while. You're certain, Bowen said, and that was not a question for knowledge but for blame. I'm not certain of the sun, John said, but it rises. Have the builders begin. Othel, I want your best men on it. No man down there alone. Use wildlings who'll work with us. Thens like leathers are good in a tunnel. Sam, Eamon, send word to Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower that we're trying a thing. If they can mirror it, good. If they can't, they should shut their gates, draw back to inner yards, and be ready to fire. Bowen, provision the men. Put food warm in their hands and salvage every damned lamp we have. We'll need light, and not just for seeing. On whose authority? Bowen said at once, but half the bite was gone, as if his habit had outrun his heart. John met his eyes. On mine, he said, and on the ice's, if it cares for our scraping. Ed touched his shoulder as they went out. You know what's worse than being crushed in a tunnel, my lord? Being crushed in a tunnel you built yourself. On the other hand, builds character. They'll sing of us. No songs, John said. If any man starts a song after, I'll put him on top of the wall to sing to the clouds. That's where songs belong, Ed said. Up so high they can't be heard. They threw the watch at the wall. Hammers bit into ancient ice like men biting bread after starving. They gnawed, spat, swallowed.
Chisel sang.
Black brothers and free folk alike heaved barrels of pitch until their shoulders shook and their joints popped like old doors. The tunnel filled with men's noise, the good noise, the living, and the wall returned it on a delay. A deep echo that made the smallest cough sound like a bear clearing his throat. Othel placed a broad-handed man named Bannon at the first gallery, a low chamber off the main passage roofed with timbers cut at a scar where a scythe had been anchored in King Jaehaerys' time. The timbers boomed when men laid them, like drums. They layered kindling and slathered pitch on the undersides of the ice roof until it gleamed black and sweet-smelling in the lamplight. Pitch runs like treacle, Bannon told the lads with him. Don't lick your fingers unless you want to shit fire tonight. Some laughed, some didn't. One weg one knelt at the far end of the main tunnel to hold a log big enough to have been a mast while 3 men lashed it up. The giant's breath came in wet plumes that feeded and hung like banners of fog. His huge hands were careful as nursemaids. Bees, one said, and smiled, showing flat teeth chipped like old flagstones. What's he say? A brother asked. Bees, Leather said, his scarred lip quirking. He thinks we're making a hive. We are, Ed said from nearby, handing wedges up to Iron Emmett on a ladder. And we hope we have honey when we're done, except it'll be dead men making it, which is fitting. I've never liked honey. Sam moved like a man in a dream with a purpose threaded through it. He hung strips of oiled wool on nails hammered into the tunnel walls, a Ragnar's trick from a book more than 100 years old, to seize flame quickly and carry it along when the wool fell and braided itself into the fire's path. He did it with a kind of surprised dignity, as if acknowledging aloud that his head had found him a place to stand where his hands could work. Sam, John said, stopping beside him with a crate of iron hooks. His breath smoked between the words. You're sure about the way fire moves in these conditions? No, Sam said, and then caught himself. That is, not sure as in certain. But warmth travels in air you make rise, and the galleries give it paths, like flutes in a bread loaf. The main corridor is straight and tight. The heat will race, but if we've set the wool right, and the pitch catches. If it doesn't, we're all dead, Ed put in helpfully. So there's no sense worrying. Behind them the forest sighed and went quiet. It was a quiet you could fall into and never stop. Even the ravens perched on the lantern chains watching with wet eyes stopped their muttering. A man's laugh carried thin as old parchment and shredded itself against the far ice. John lifted his head and ghosts with it, as if some string ran through them both. The direwolf's tail lifted, fell, lifted again. He could smell it too. Nothing and everything. The absence that made his nose strain hard enough to hurt. It brought back a snowbound night at Craster's with a smell like cold metal and rotten leaves. Soundless boots in the snow, hands that were hands and not. "Ot hell," he called. His voice traveled. Men lifted their heads. Those on ladders clung closer for a moment and then made themselves climb down. "How many galleries are ready?" "3, Othel said. He looked toward the tunnel mouth and the night beyond it where the air made a border like a black door. His eyes were old and tired and strong. "We need a 4th to make it sure. And the wedges set on the main beam. Another hour." "We don't have it," John said. He heard it. He hated to speak the truth the ice had told him. "They're near." He sent for Leathers and told him to bleed the goats. 3 of them, old and long-horned, used to men. Leathers did it without ceremony. 1 slash across the neck for each, and their hot smell poured out of them, rich as soup in winter. They dragged the carcasses and hung them from the chains strung across the first section of the tunnel, just inside the outer gate, where the cold wind licked at them and made their blood steam in faint whips. They set 2 braziers behind, modest and coaxing, not enough to throw a bright light, only a suggestion of warmth. "Bell," John said. His throat felt raw. Ed took the rope and pulled. The bell in the timber yard began to speak, deep and slow, the sound creeping down the tunnel like a man feeling his way. The ice sang back on delay, turning each toll into an answering heart. The men took their places. Othel nodded to his wedges. 3 men took up knives at 3 ropes. Sam went from oil wool to oil wool, touching a tinder to each, and little tongues of flame turned up like surprised children. They looked thin. John wanted them fat and arrogant. Perhaps he wanted everything to be fat and arrogant. It was the wrong season for that. They opened the outer gates. Took 8 men on the winch to win the ice's permission. The door lifted, thumped, lifted again. Snow whirled in from the north like daylight gone wrong. The world beyond was a white flatness studded with the black bones of trees. If you looked long, you saw it heave, because the world beyond did not lie still any longer. Movement resolved slowly, darkness that moved like water. A man would blink and say, "It is wind blowing drifted snow and shadows of trees," and then you saw the eyes. Ice blue, the color of broken sky, here and here and here, as if stars had tumbled down and gotten caught in faces. The front ranks were quiet. No snarls, no howls. They did not speak. Some crawled, use of their knees and hands like old memory. Some walked with arms held stiff and fingers splayed like winter twigs. There was no rank or file to it, only tide. They came for the warmth like moths come for a flame, and as with moths, some shrank at the first lick of heat, even so modest a promise, then surged again when the bodies ahead of them caught and showed the way. They stepped over the threshold of the gate as if it did not exist. It made something inside John's ribs slide and clatter. That the wall could reject kings and welcome hunger in borrowed skins felt like the meanest trick gods ever made. "Hold," John said. The men held. They were good men, most of them, and even those who were not wanted to be. The Wights moved into the tunnel, and the first of them tripped on the chain and fell, and the others walked over its legs with crackles like stepping on a nest of reeds. The goats hung and twisted. Frozen blood had lacquered their hides. Something inside the first Wight's chest made a sound like a wet wind when it reached the goat and burrowed its face in the belly. His hands worked like claws. It didn't eat. They never ate. But they wanted to. John wondered if that was worse. "Hold," he said again. The dragon's glass knife at his belt, the old black arrowhead Sam had found at the fist, tugged at him with a memory. Ghost stood as if carved, fur bristled tall along his spin. The oil wool sagged in a slow, slushy fall and caught the first goat's hair. It flared. The other rag fell too. Flame licked around the goat, low and complaining. The Wights pushed into it, were forced back, came again, smoldered, simply kept coming. They were slow, that was the thing. But slow water drowns you if you stand in it long enough, and you have to learn a new way to swim. "Now," John said. Knives bit rope. 3 ropes snapped. The wedges slipped with a sound like teeth sucked on. The roof did not fall. It hung for a moment indecisive, as if stubborn in an old shape. And then the timbers screamed and Othel bellowed and one grunted and something in the long blue of the ice sighed like a woman lying back and the roof came down. Fell in slabs heavy as whales. It fell as if it had been waiting, which perhaps it had for 100 years. It fell into the modest fires and lit them huge. It fell on the dead men and turned them into kindling. Flame and steam rose together, an old marriage. A wave of wind came back along the tunnel, hot and wet, and it shoved men backward into each other and made the lantern chains jump. The noise was not a noise you put a name to. It was an idea of noise. Pushed through your ears and found your bones and shook them. Back, John shouted. Though his voice sounded like a child's beside the crash, they were already backing. Men grabbed those who stumbled. The oil wool flared and burned blue where the pitch ran under it. The second gallery caught from the first as if a torch had been passed hand to hand. Where ice fell into fire it leapt red and bright and alive, and where fire climbed ice the ice steamed and screamed and fell again. Wights pushed as water pushes. Wights burned where men had never burned correctly. They burned with a sort of greedy hiss as if their flesh had forgotten how to say no. They dropped the second roof and the third. The ceiling of the tunnel came down in teeth, each bite chewing more cold into heat and more heat into cold. The wall shook beneath their feet. John heard a crack that was not in the plan. He tasted copper. He turned. Bowen Marsh's face had gone pale under its permanent ruddiness. "If we've said it wrong," Bowen said matter-of-factly, "we'll be dead before we know, which is the best comfort I can offer." "Thank you," John said. "Go." They retreated down the tunnel, dragging lanterns, one man looking back for every two looking forward, because you had to watch the heat as well as the human. At the inner gate, Iron Emmett and PYP breathing too fast, impossible not to see how fast, stood with a squad at the winch. Beyond them, the yard was full of smoke and men and the smell of stew that had been hot once and now was not. Above it all the aurora curled its indifferent banners. Ed stumbled, fetched up hard against a beam, straightened with dignity as if discovering he enjoyed impacts. Behind them the fourth section went. The blast of heat that chased them licked at their cloaks and made lamp glass pop. A raven tried to fly the wrong way and hit the hot air and dropped with a cry of astonished outrage. Feathers crisped. Ghost yelped as the hair at his tail's end curled. John kicked a fallen man in the arse to get him up and did not apologize. The inner gate thumped down like a judge's hand. "Wedges," Othel panted. "Set them again. God save me. I'm too old for this and I was too old the first time." "Save that for prayers," Ed said. "The gods don't listen to carpenters. They think you'll fix it yourself." The inner gate was iron on oak, thick and bolted with glaciers of old nail. The heat struck it and made it sweat, and where the sweat ran it froze white again because the night on this side was so very cold. John laid his palm against it and was not sure whether he was comforted or horrified to feel it alive. On the other side, the world howled without a throat, and between the howls he heard new sounds. A glassy clink, a chattering like stones rolled in a sieve, a delicate tink-tink-tink as if someone far away tapped with a jeweler's hammer at something very fine. "What is that?" PYP whispered. "Stars breaking," Ed said, and then, more practically, "Hope, not hope," Sam said, pale and astonished, coming down with a bundle of wool still unlit in his hands as if unsure what it was for. "Listen, it's the cold. The ice is cracking from cold as well as heat. They're making it colder. The others are close." John put his shoulder to the gate. He wanted to feel them like a horse feels another beyond a fence. He wanted to know. Came like stepping from a warm bath onto stone. It was not merely cold. It was the idea of cold. You understood then that the cold you had known all your life had been a kindness, winter's gentle slap and warning. The chuckle of a friend who'd rather you left than stayed in his house uninvited. This was winter opening its door and telling you to lie down. It was old beyond counting and polite as a knife. "Back," John said, because the iron began to sing. A high note. The men looked at him and looked at the gate and then stepped back as one, and that was another miracle to add to the day's ledger. The iron stopped singing and started to creak instead, and the frost along the seams blossomed, petal by petal, white flowers, a wedding garland for a corpse. He thought of the black gate then, the old weirwood mouth at the night fort that opened its lips only to a brother's oath. He thought of how its milk-white eyes had wept and how its wood had felt like skin under a hand. If the wall was a jaw, then that was its tongue, and though he could not be in two places at once, he felt, with a sudden odd clarity, that the night fort was awake. More wedges, Othel said, practical within vision, because builders were priests of reality and the small things that held it together. Stack them along here. If the pressure comes through, we'll bleed it to both sides and take the strain where we can bear it. God save us from where we cannot. They worked. The dead worked too on their side, in their way, which was to push and to be pushed. Once John saw, through a seam when they lifted the bar to adjust a wedge, a face pressed against the other gate. It was a child's face, a girl of perhaps 5 with hair braided tight against her skull, as if a mother had loved her once. Eyes a color no child should be. Her mouth was open. What she did with her tongue had nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with the idea of eating. The look in her eyes was absence become worship. "Close it," John said, and Sam let the bar drop with a thump that echoed longer than it should. Fire cheered in the galleries. It came lower now, a simmering roar like a long sigh that never ended. The smell was sweet and sick both. Men coughed and some wept without knowing it. Someone began to murmur the words of the oath and someone else told him to shut it. Not unkindly, because nobody needed to remind the wall what men had promised it if it was in the mood to remember. The night on the north side changed again. It became sharper and thin as glass. From a seam near the floor, a line of frost crept along the stone like ivy. It swelled and made little snick sounds as it grew. Ed peered at it and stepped on it, and it cracked under his boot with a sound like a mouse's neck breaking. He lifted his boot, and the frost was back. "Clever bastards," he said. "I hate clever bastards. If you're to kill me, do it stupid. It's kinder." They gave the ropes to one. The giant wrapped cords as thick as a man's wrist around his forearms and leaned his shoulder against the beam that braced the gate. He watched John, small eyes grave. John nodded, and one heaved on the ropes, and the inner wall of the first gallery, rigged to be a shield as well as a tooth, dropped with a crash that made the gate's iron jump. Heat puked into the yard, a great beast's breath, and ice on the gate wept again and then froze. The shock traveled through the tunnel and made a sound like rain. The rain was bits of the dead falling. They held. They held until the fire had eaten all it would, and what it could not it had licked and passed on. They held until Ghost sank to his haunches and stared with his red eyes and did not blink, which meant the worst had crested and gone, though not far. Then they let themselves breathe. Bowen Marsh sat down suddenly on a barrel and looked at his own hands as if they had betrayed him by being his. Othel sagged against a beam and blessed a god he did not name aloud. Ed took the bell rope again and rang one long note, and the note came back to them softer, as if someone far away had agreed. "Count," John said to no one and everyone, and so they counted. They counted men and barrels and wedges and goats and lanterns. They counted breath. They counted Winter's ways with them and Winter's ways against them. Iron Emmett frowned his honest frown and said, "PYP?" PYP answered from a little way off, cheerful out of reflex. "I'm here. I still have all my fingers. And most of my wits." He lifted one hand and waggled it. His hand was bare as if he had stripped off his glove, though he had not. The color of it turned John's stomach. PYP smiled and tried to make it a jest, and then the skin split across his knuckles with a thin crack and he swore and stuck his hand under his arm, eyes suddenly huge and shiny. Emmett got to him and rapped it and said nothing, good man that he was. Sam leaned against a barrel and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was Sam still, with the old bravery that meant he would run if he had to and run toward if he could not bear to do nothing. He murmured to John without looking at him, as if speaking to the air would make his words less dangerous. "They were close," he said, "closer than I have ever felt, cold like a thought. If they had walked into the tunnel, the others, if they had come in person." "They didn't," John said. "Fire did what it does, but they'll learn. They always do." "They're old," Eamon said. He had come unnoticed, led by Clydes's gentle hand, and his feet had made no sound because they were careful, because every step now was a decision. That does not make them clever, but it makes them patient. There is a difference. You can lose to patience as easily as you lose to quick wits. John almost answered, then did not. He did not want to say out loud that patience was the one thing the watch had been in the habit of squandering long before he was born. When the heat fell to a breath and the iron stopped shivering, Othel called for picks. They lifted the inner wicket, a smaller door within the gate, no wider than a man's shoulders, and a wind like a wet hand touched their faces. They peered through. The tunnel beyond was a throat of black soot and white steam and red. The galleries had burned and fallen. The main passage was blocked in 3 places by collapsed roofs. Between those places were piles of ash and something like charcoal. Parts moved in them. Fingers that were not fingers anymore. Ribs that were just the idea of ribs. John's stomach turned again and then stopped doing anything. "Rope," he said. "Mask your mouths. No one goes in over his boots. The floor might be ice and it might be soup. Soup is good," Ed said. "I'd eat a bowl of dead man if it was hot. I'm not proud." "Don't," Sam said almost sharply. "Don't make it a jest. Please." Ed looked abashed, which was so rare it felt like a snowdrop opening. "Sorry," he said. "I forget my mouth when it's cold." John took the first rope. "No," Bowen Marsh said flatly, and John knew he had been waiting to find a place for that word. "Lord Commander, Emmett has to see to PYP," John said reasonably. "Othel's hands are shaking more than he knows. Sam will be useful where he is. Ed, you're with me. Leathers, too. And one can't fit, though gods know it would be a comfort if he could." "Ooh." And one grinned, as if he understood. "Bees," he said, and his grin was sad. They crawled. The tunnel's heat made breathing like drinking. The stank. The stink was not of rot because rot needed time and this was too fresh and too cold and too burned for rot. It was the stink of things becoming other things quickly. Their masks, rags soaked in vinegar from the kitchen, kept the sharpness off but not the idea of it. They carried hooks, and with hooks they pulled what moved and with knives they quieted it if it needed quieting. Most did not. John took no joy from how easily they had been undone here in their house of heat. It did not translate to hope. It translated to 1 small hour rescued from a night that sprawled. Between the second and third collapses they found men whose oath had not saved them. 2 had been dragged in by the tide and pressed under the fall and flattened in a way that made them look like images in a book, figures stamped to teach a lesson. 1 had been one of the thens they hired to cut, his tattooed brow half peeled by the heat. Leathers made a small sound and touched the man's shoulder, then did not again. Ed found a raven with its wings charred to sticks and lifted it and tucked it into his cloak as if to apologize. "I always liked this one," he murmured. "This was the one who said, 'Corn like my mother.'" "That was all of them," John said gently. "Shows what you know," Ed said, so mild that it took the bite out of the words, and then he put the bird down and went on. He was careful where he put his feet, which was the kindest thing a man could be here. They reached the last collapse. Beyond it the night on the north side peered in, brighter for the fires behind them and the white of heaped snow beyond the mouth. Something moved just out of sight. John felt it like a moon behind a cloud. Not the dead who were not, but the ones who made them. Ed felt it too, because he pressed harder against John's shoulder without seeming to notice doing it. "They won't come," John said. He did not know if that was for Ed or himself. "Not into the fire. Not yet." He found a hand in the ash. Fresh, not burned. The fingers rhymed around the knuckles, as if someone had dipped them in white wax. A ring lay crooked on the third finger, a cheap brass thing with a stone blue-green as river glass. He looked at the skin, which was sallow and pitted with an old pox. He knew the ring. He had taken it off the boy once when he had gotten it caught on a nail and torn himself and cried and lied about it. The boy had been called Cheese by the others because he had hair the color of old straw. The boy was 17 and eager and bad at lying. John could not have said which of those had killed him. Leathers was ahead of them, muttering in the old tongue that sounded like stones falling in a slow river. He turned, and his scar twisted with the turning. "Back," he said. "They taste us." John did not point out that taste was not the right word. Taste was close enough for a thing that was not about senses. They retreated, careful. When they came out through the wicket and stood again in air that was only cold and not purposeful, men surrounded them and wanted a story to live by for an hour. John shook his head once, and they let him not speak, which was finer courtesy than any he had been shown by lords in a long time. What they did, then, was continue living, because that is what men do in a long night. They took down the charred timbers and replaced them and set new wedges. They dragged out what could be dragged and burned what needed burning and said the words for the men who needed the words even if they had died doing something clever, which felt like a worse sin than the sin of dying stupid because clever made you think you were excused. They slept in snatches and woke with their bones creaking and their tongues tasting of pennies. Sam wrote letters he could not have read if he had not written them himself and tied them to ravens who swore and bit him and flew into the green-struck dark. At dawn that was not dawn, only a lightening of the aurora's green to greenish. They met in the old bear's hall. Its rafters were a forest of beams scarred by old smoke and new. Eamon sat wrapped in furs like all the gods of winter had decided to sit in an old man's lap. Othel's hands shook less. Bowen Marsh had found the bottom of his anger and sat there like a man sitting in a cupboard, surprised to find it a room you could fit into. "We bought a day," John said. "Maybe two. We can make the trap again and again. We have pitch. We don't have endless men to work it or Barry to hold it up. We also have friends," Tormund Giantsbane said from the back, where he had not been a moment before. He arrived everywhere like digestion, sudden and embarrassing and making you feel oddly better once you accepted it. His beard shone like a flood that had brought along a fire by mistake. "If you call me friend, Crow, it's done," John said. "Your people can work this too. They hate the dead more than they hate us." "They hate you a lot," Tormund said cheerfully, seating himself on a bench that had creaked under men and would creak under giants if asked. "But they hate the dead more. Hate's a fine measure when you can't afford love. I brought 6 men who know how to make snow caves stand when they want them to and fall when they don't. Ice is ice, whether you shit south of it or north. They'll want pay," Bowen put in, and Tormund laughed and slapped his thigh and the bench told him off and held anyway. "I'll take my pay in dead men," Tormund said. "And meat that's not man. Crow, you are scrawny. Are all your lords like this? Clipped down to nothing like sheep in spring?" "Some," John said, which felt like a mercy of truth. They worked together then, and it went better for a time because Tormund 6 had tricks the watch had not, and the watch had the stubbornness of a wall and the habit of orders, and if you put St. a born in habit with a trick and did not insult the trick too much, it made a new thing. They cut galleries farther in, deeper and low like the burrows of worried foxes. They filled long sacks with sharp stones and hung them from beams on release knots, so that when a wedge fell, the sacks would fall and smash what stood under and break apart to leave shards that would freeze into nets that cut the ankles of anything that tried to push through. Sam and Eamon worked a different line of defense. They talked to the trees in their way. Eamon's hands traced old knots while Sam read to him the names of the first men who had cut and cured those beams. Men nobody had spoken of in 200 years. Men with little names like Tom Fair and Harl the Blue-Eyed. When Sam spoke their names, the beams creaked. It could have been heat. It could have been old wood remembering rain. It felt like not that. Eamon smiled and touched the wood and said soft, secret words that were not spells and were not spells. John did not ask. He did not want to know, because wants had a way of making holes in a man, and holes were what the night was full of. The second lure came at midnight with the lights above the trees flayed to shreds by a wind that blew where no wind should. They rang the bell again, and this time 2 bells, and the sound braided. The dead came as before. More, perhaps, but who counted waves? The modest fire kissed them and was a bad kiss, and they pushed into it and did not remember to mind their mouths and ate goat that was fire on one side and cold on the other, and the eating made its own new misery. They plunged, and the galleries fell, and the heat ran, and the cold came to meet it. And for a while it felt like watching air argue with itself. The argument went on. The third time it was different. They must not have liked losing the same way twice. The first ranks came as usual, as if to flatter. The second ranks went along the foot of the wall in both directions, thin as spilled ink, half hidden by snow. The night ran with them. John sensed the shape of it more than saw, the way a man senses an ox in a fog and you feel the size before the sound. The others were making for the smaller Sally Port East, the old one they never used because its hinges had rotted and been replaced and then rotted again. "Ed," John said softly. Ed was at his elbow like bad luck. "That port open?" Ed looked pained. "Open, my lord?" If it was open, the gods would have taken it as a favor and blown it shut, locked tight and braced with 3 beams and a prayer to any god who enjoys doors. "They'll enjoy breaking it," Tormund said. He had the gift, or curse, of turning up where the blood was thickest. Giant talk, in dead tongues. HRRR? HRRR. That says, door. Says, little door, ours for a mouth. John put men there at once, men with torches and spears and arrows with tips wrapped in oily cloth. Sam found a black dragonglass spear point in a sack he had thought held onions and put it into Leathers' hand with solemnity, as if knighting him. Leathers grinned like a wolf taught to laugh and took it and set himself at the narrow before the beams. The dead came thin and fast there and made no sound. They pushed at the beams and did not start as one, but each hand seemed to know the other's intent as if they all belonged to one mind. When the beams held, the cold changed its idea. John felt it rush. It poured not like air but like hunger. The old iron hinges sang and then screamed, and the frost from outside the stones crept through the stone itself like veins returning blood to a wrong heart. "Fire," John said through his teeth. They fired. Arrows made little flares. Pitch slopped and stuck and skinned men, not men, and the small door steamed where the big gate had sung. It held, because iron that is sung to will sometimes listen if it likes your song. The dead did not get through there. They went back to the main idea and pushed where the galleries lay. They were patient. They could afford to be. After the third night, they slept in turns like men on a ship that had no shore to come to. Eamon slipped sometimes, and his head went forward and he jerked and smiled and said he had been awake all along. Sam watched him as if waiting, and John watched Sam as if he could change it with will, which was a child's thought, but he let himself have it for a moment because it was warm. On the 4th night, the others came closer than before. John did not see them and did not need to. The cold came in a way that articulated itself. It used the tunnel as a mouth. The men knew it because their breath stopped making smoke for a moment and then came out in a long skein that frightened them after because it made a shape that was almost a man. The fire in the second gallery went out without going out, as if the idea of flame had been taken from it. The men there ran. Ed wanted to go and help, and John said no and held him, physically, wrist to wrist. It was as close to a betrayal as he ever wanted to come. "We can't fight that," John said softly, as if telling the truth very quietly would make it kinder. "No," Ed said, "but we can go die doing it." "Not tonight," John said. They dropped the roof on that gallery early, and the fall was sharper as if the ice had decided to break hard and not weep. The heat from the earlier fires leapt to her feet again and ran forward like a dog that had been sleeping by a hearth. It snarled when it hit the cold. The night recoiled the smallest bit, and Othel made a sound like a man relieved of a big piss. "Ha!" he said. "Ah, there you are." When dawn came without coming, a strange quiet settled. Men blinked at each other as if expecting a new sound to come immediately, but nothing did. They stood and swayed and waited for orders that had all been given. It was Tormund who broke it, his rough hand falling on John's shoulder with affection violent enough to jar his teeth, which was Tormund's only kind of affect. "Tyon, see," Tormund said. "You make tricks and call bears and piss on your own boots, and sometimes winter gives you an hour to catch your breath. We should use it. Let's go out and haul their white bones up like fish caught under ice. Pile them for a wall of our own." "We don't go out," Bowen said, louder than he needed, as if volume could be a substitute for command. "We don't open the gate for anything." John turned to him. "We can clear the path in the tunnel. We need to pull beams and bodies both. If we leave them to freeze where they are, they'll become part of the wall, And next time it'll be our trap that's the trap for us. Send a pair, Tormund said. Not men you like, men you need. I don't keep those piles separate, Jon said. I'm not a clever enough lord. In the end, he went himself again with Leathers, and with a boy called Bannon's son who insisted on the title though his father had never claimed him, and with Ed because Ed went any time there was a chance to be flattened. They wore chains across their chests and spikes and small bells like the ones that goats wear in high pastures, to cry out if they were buried. They crawled and hooked and pulled. Once Leathers yanked on something and it yanked back, and they saw that a burned hand had closed around the hook and refused to let go, and Leathers cursed and cut the hand at the wrist and pried his hook back with an angry, almost embarrassed tenderness. Sorry, old man, he said to the hand. Sorry, you didn't mean it. Near the mouth of the tunnel, they found one of the other's gifts. It was a ridge of ice shaped like a blade, not laid there but grown, a lichen of blade. It glowed faintly as if the aurora had left behind a piece of itself. When Jon touched the tip with a gloved finger, it sang up into his finger bones and then into his arm and into his shoulder and then into his mouth and teeth. He jerked back and the sound stayed in him. He could not be sure it would ever go away. Don't touch it, Sam said when they brought it to him wrapped in fur, and set it down like a thing that might break the floor or through it. Throw it into fire. We can't, Jon said. I tried a coal. It made the coal go cold. I'm half afraid it would make a forge go cold too. Bury it, Eamon said. He had pulled the fur back with hands that shook and then stopped shaking. Far from the wall. In salt if we can. In earth where earth remembers summer. There is memory in dirt that cold cannot erase. Put it there. If the gods are paying attention, they will let the ground be stubborn for us. So they took it to the old midden pit behind the armory, a place where habit had made a mountain and then made it again when snow reduced it. They dug down into layers of old straw and worse, and then into a crumbly place that was brown and smelled, shockingly, like rain. They put the blade there and covered it. The smell took the cold out of Jon's nose for a moment. He breathed hard, like a man who had held water in his mouth for days and been allowed to swallow at last. He looked at Ed, and Ed looked at him and did not say any of the terrible things he could have. They ate stew that afternoon that tasted almost of meat and more of onion and mostly of heat, which was another kind of meat. Tormund told a story about a woman who had married a bear and had twins by him, and how you could tell by the way the boys pissed into the wind that they had hair where boys shouldn't. Men laughed and he laughed and Jon did not, but he did smile. Bowen Marsh did not smile and Jon did not blame him. Othel's men slept with their hammers on their chests like knights, and Sam slept with his head on his arms and drooled a little, and Ed laid a bit of straw over his mouth to keep it in, and Sam did not notice, and Ed removed it again before Sam woke, because he was kind even in little cruelties when they were only jokes. Toward evening they saw shapes on the far side of the forest, not near but not far enough to be comfort. Black lines with masts. For a moment Jon thought, idiot that he was now, ships, as if a fleet had grown among pines. Then he understood. Trees cut and dragged. They were bringing timbers not to build but to break. The others had learned, or the Wights had learned for them, that ice cracked when braces were pulled too fast, and that collapse made warm wind, and that warm wind made passage. They had decided to build a collapse of their own. He called the council again, which was to say he called all the men who were still breathing and could be made to listen. He stood only because sitting felt like a lie. He looked up at the rafters where old smoke had painted forests of its own and tried to think like an enemy who did not think like a man. If they bring logs to the mouth of the tunnel and drive them to break the roof, it will fall where we are not ready, Othel said, hands flat on the table as if keeping it from floating away. We can't brace what we don't set. We could sally, Emmett said. His eyes were bright and raw. Meet them in the yard of the gods. We've done it before. And lose half of us to gain the second half dead, which is a bargain if you're selling horses, Ed said. I'd rather not. What else? Jon asked. He felt long suddenly, as if his bones had been pulled like taffy. He saw a picture in his head of a boy in Winterfell standing on a wall hardly higher than a tower of barrels, looking out at a snowfall and thinking it the whole world. He wanted to laugh and kiss that boy's hair and tell him to duck. A trench, Sam said. His voice shook when he spoke in company. It did not shake now. Not long and not deep, just before the mouth of the tunnel. We cover it with thin ice and snow and boards. Let them bring their logs and their weight, and let them fall into it themselves. We set pitch at the bottom and oil on the sides and light it once they are in. It will make a new burn in a place they do not expect. We'll have tea. I'll cut it quick. And it puts men outside the gate while it's being done. We cut at dusk, Tormund said immediately. At dusk the light lies to you and to them both. Give me 20 men who know how to hurt themselves for the right reasons. You'll have 10, Jon said without any right to be funny and some compulsion from exhaustion. The other 10 I'll keep for reasons of my own. Make a tunnel to trap a log, Othell said, eyes like a craftsman's. A man who saw all the angles in wood and in the world, not in front but under, a little down and to the left. When they push their brace into the main roof, our little tunnel will take the bite. We let it fall when the weight is on it. That will steal their push from them. Tunnels to trap tunnels, Ed said. When we are done, we'll be living like moles. I've always thought someone would turn me into something small and blind, so this saves time. Jon set it in motion. Dusk became a cloak. It always had. He stood under it with 10 men at the mouth and watched Tormund take his 10 out like a joke told to the night. They moved slow, and even the big man could do that when he wanted. They cut in a hurry that did not look like a hurry. Othell's 2 best cutters went under and to the left like moles, and the ice whispered around them. The dead came late, as if the others had told them to wait for the punchline. They came with their timbers and their quiet and their blue and their patience. Jon's men fell back as if surprised to find themselves outside and grateful to go in. The first ranks did not fall into the trench. They skirted it without meaning to, the way water skirts a place where a river remembers a rock that is not there anymore. The second ranks pushed, and the third pushed more, and then the weight told and the crust broke and a dozen went down and a dozen more walked on them and the trench drank. Jon saw legs like sticks and faces like old pigs' bladders and heard no sound but the crack and the hiss when pitch at the bottom found fire. Leathers threw in a torch from a hook and the trench bloomed like a garden, all orange and sharp. The dead with the timbers came forward anyway because purpose is a rope that pulls. They set their logs and pushed and the logs went into the small trap instead and bit and were caught. The ice let go where Othell had asked it to and stayed where he had begged it to, this once, this careful once. The pressure changed. Jon felt it in his feet like a drum. The main roof did not fall. The little one did, and when it fell it took with it the strength of what the dead had brought. The tunnel's mouth became a mouth again, not a throat yawning. The night stepped back the smallest bit, as if compelled to take a breath it did not want. Back, Jon said softly and then loud. The men came in as they had gone out, quicker for knowing they had a door to run through. Tormund came last, which was his habit. He was laughing and spitting and cursing, and his beard had frozen, a solid mass of spun glass. Jon clapped his shoulder and felt the sharpness of that ice through leather and cloth into bone. That was how hard they had burned and how hard they had frozen. They set the last wedge of the night, and then there was nothing to do but be alive. Jon found himself outside without meaning to. The yard was quiet in the way of a room after an argument that solved nothing. Stars showed beyond the green, a few of them, and he thought of the blade they had buried and wondered if it lay singing into the dirt and whether the dirt sang back. Eamon found him there, which meant Clydas found him, and Eamon followed. The old man's steps were cautious and swift, the special speed of someone who had learned how to move by listening to the world complain. "You hold them," Eamon said. "You'll not hold them forever." "No," Jon said, "but longer than a day ago." Eamon smiled, bruise-colored mouth turning up like a thought you wanted to keep. "Do you know the old words?" he asked, and Jon knew he meant not the oath, not the names of kings, but the words that people had used for things before they understood them. The wall was once called a kind of white sword, cuts less than it separates. What you have done is make it learn a new cut. "It cuts us too," Jon said. "We lose men in the same bite. That is the kind of cut swords make," Eamon said. "You have made of this place a mouth and a harp and now a sword. That is 3 things and more than most men manage in a winter. You have not gone south. I am glad of that." "I thought of it," Jon said, truth relieving itself like a debt paid. "So did I," Eamon said. "When I was young and old and in between. It does not make you unique. It makes you a man with a door. We close those as often as we open them." John wanted to say that closing doors felt like murder when those on the other side had faces, even if the faces had eyes that were wrong. He did not. He had learned to keep some hurts without names because names fixed hurts in a way that made them last. Inside, men slept like dropped coats. Sam had curled against a buttress like a bundled child, his hands clutching a book as if it were a stomach full of soup. Ed slept with his legs out straight in a way that meant he would wake with knees like stairs. Bowen Marsh snored and then stopped and then snored again, a man who had not made peace with breathing. Othel lay on his back with one hand on his chest, and when he exhaled his breath made a thin rattle that would have worried John if there had been room left in him to be worried by thin rattles. Ghost nosed John's hand and then leaned hard into his thigh as if to push him toward bed. He went. He slept an hour and dreamed of running on 6 legs and waking in snow that had written words across itself and forgotten them already. When he woke, dawn had not come and would not, perhaps for days. Ed had left him a heel of bread and a cup of something that sputtered smoke off it. He ate and drank and felt warmer for having done something simple. Another day, another go. Men like to pretend the big moments define them, but it is the ordinary day repeated that builds the house and digs the grave. John put his boots on and tied his cloak and found his sword where he had left it. He went out into the yard and breathed air that bit him, and he bit it back. The wall groaned. He heard in it old laughter and young fear and all the patience the world had ever had. He thought, without knowing why, of Arya chasing cats and Sansa singing, of Rob's smile, of Bran staring at birds and seeing farther than a boy should. They were not hopes so much as names he could still say to himself to prove he was a person and not a door that opened and closed to let the weather through. They worked the trap again and then again. Each time the dead learned something. Each time the living learned it faster or slower and paid the difference with skin. The trench idea bought them one night and part of another until the dead stopped trying that way. The brace trap under the left worked until the others came themselves and changed the angle in the air so the pressure shifted elsewhere and broke the roof where they wanted. Sometimes they nearly had the main gate. Sometimes they nearly had the smaller one. Once they came silently up on the wooden stairs to the top of the wall where a dozen men stood with tinder and torches to light barrels to drop, and would have put their cold hands on those men and turned them to statues if Leathers had not smelled them the way a wolf smells uphill, and set the wood to fire so fast he burned off 2 fingers and did not notice until Ed stuck his hand in snow and said, "There you go, you fool." They lost men. Gren, who had once held a gate against a giant in a story he laughed about because he said he had been so scared he shat his courage, went down in a fall when a wedge slipped and the beam came at him like a wall he had decided to marry. They took him out flat and grief-struck and told a story over him and put him on a pyre, and the flames climbed and would not quite take because the cold sat on them like a fat man, and they had to push with their breath and their bodies until the fire made up its mind. PYP kept his fingers, because Emmett was careful and mean and would not let him show them to anyone. Othel got his breath back and lost it again and lived anyway because men who build often do. Eamon did not die, not yet, which felt like a reprieve signed by a man with a shaking hand. Sam found a book that had fallen behind a chest that told of a winter before that nobody in the room except the book remembered, where men had tried to build walls of sound, and he read it and cried and closed it and said no. John did not savor victories because victories were bites the dark allowed him to take. He counted them anyway the way men count coin when the debt is still large. The tunnels held. The dead piled. The fire cut trenches through them and made of the tunnel a road of ash and steam. The others did not come in, not once, not fully, because they did not step into flame, not even when the flame was dying. They made the flame go quiet sometimes, and that was worse than stepping, because it was a hand on a man's mouth when he tried to cry out, but it needed them near, and they were cautious when caution cost them nothing. On a night when the aurora lay flat like silk and the stars looked like tiny holes in a blue-black cloth, Ghost lifted his head and growled in a tone John had not heard in some time, not since the King's Road. The hair on John's arms netted itself. He stood and went to the tunnel without knowing why his feet chose that path. He found Sam there already, and Ed and Othel and Leathers. They were men who knew not to disobey what a part of them older than language told them. The tunnel was quiet. The burned places smoked like men who had taken to pipes late. The night beyond the mouth looked ordinary for winter, flat and white and deadly to lungs. No blue eyes, no line of black shapes, no movement save the kind that makes you doubt your eyesight. "Where are they?" Ed whispered, a joke's shape without a joke inside. "Not gone," Sam said. He swallowed. "Not gone. Waiting," John said. He could feel it. Patience had returned. The dead had pushed and learned and made long mouths to bite. Now they were learning to starve where it mattered most, in themselves. They wait for something else, for a signal, for the cold to crack something that hasn't cracked. "The sea?" Adhel asked. "East watch. Cold doesn't crack sea," Ed said. "It turns it into something you can walk on, which is worse than a crack and better than a door." "Let them wait," John said into the night, a little reckless. "Let them wait and think of us waiting and see which of us starves first." He knew the answer to that. Men starved quick. The dead did it with no cost. But the living had gravity and love and the trick of making the same act different by doing it together. They set to work again because there was work. They ate because there was stew. They slept because eyes needed to close. They did not go mad because the world had too much of it without them adding their share. When it broke in a place none of them had watched closely enough. The old Sally Crack West. A seam in the wall no wider than a man's wrist where spring thaw and winter wait had been arguing for the length of a lifetime. The dead found it, or the cold found it and told them. They pressed there, not to get through but to make it carry a new song to the tunnel's timbers. The sound traveled. It made the wedges hum. One slipped. Adhel felt it through his foot and shouted, voice 2 octaves above his usual. "East brace," he cried. "Down, down, down." They were too slow. The brace went and the next, and then the roof above the second gallery let go in one great slab and the steam hurt the men in it. In a new way, the way you hate a friend who tells you a new truth. John was there and saw it, and he dived forward without permission from anyone, and the heat took his hair in a shred and curled it. And he seized a hand that belonged to someone he thought was Bannon's son and pulled and fell back because the hand came away with him without the man, the skin sloughing. He heard a scream and did not know if it was his. He could not let go of the hand because his glove had stuck, and he shook it hard and the hand flapped like a fish, and Ed was there with his dagger and cut the glove and the hand thumped on the floor and stuck there, a sign. "Back!" Ed shouted in a voice John had never heard him use. Iron Emmett was there and Leathers and PYP, and they hauled and shoved and moved men with a herd's intelligence born of terror and practice. The second gallery's fall became a third too soon, and it made a pocket of dark beyond it that swallowed the fire's light like a mouth swallowing a candle. Cold poured into the pocket and sat there like a king on a chair. "Fire the fourth," John gasped. The words hurt his throat more than the heat. "Burn them, burn it all." They lit the fourth gallery with a whole barrel at once, rolling it and spearing it and splitting it and setting fire that did not ask. It ran into the place the fall had made, and when it got there it met the cold that had settled like a person, and the two of them did something to each other that made men outside weep for no reason and men inside try to pray with no words. Then the cold let the fire lip its edges, and the fire went in like a man under a blanket, and the blanket charred, and the man got out again, and it was enough. The pressure eased. The new fall stopped wanting to be an older one. The braces held where Adhel shouted and cursed and blessed every saint he had ever heard named, and two he made up. After, the tunnel was a thing made of cracks and vows. It had become an old boat, could float. It could take a wave if the men in it did not stand in the wrong place at the wrong time. John stood against a beam the size of a horse and put his cheek against it and felt its roughness. He did not weep. He felt something happen in his chest that was not weeping and was not. Toward morning, when the aurora had faded into a thin smear and the stars pretended mist, a horn sounded from the top of the wall. It was one long note. Men stopped. Men looked up. The horn sounded again. It was no sound they had heard from their own horn. It came from the north. It was made of no instrument men made. It was the voice of ice, poured through something that remembered a throat. "3," Sam whispered, horror and certainty touching. "3. The old tales said 3 for others. That was boys' talk and old women's talk and truth that had worn out its knees crawling to be believed. The dead did not rush. A shadow moved at the edge of the forest line. It looked like a line of men until you looked and saw their joints did not move like men's. Behind them, no. Among them, at their center, because the dead did not lead and did not follow, walked a figure tall and pale, armor like milk frozen in patterns, hair like rime shaken from winter pine boughs. His eyes did not burn. They were cold. They did not need fire to be seen. Men with him, no, not men. Others like him, fewer. Those like him hung back from the mouth where the fires waited. They lifted their long lances with tips like the blade they had buried. The cold bowed around them like a courtier, and for a heartbeat John hated it for its civility more than ever he had hated it for its cruelty. "Hold," he said, and his voice was too human. "Hold. Don't fire. Don't tempt them to learn. Let them think the tunnel is our only trick." He wanted one thing, for them to step into the trap arrogant. They did not. The tall one came to the very edge and held out his lance as if to measure the air. The cold pushed, slow and inexorable. The flames shuddered and leaned as if a wind had tricked them, and then they curved, and then they found themselves straight again because Othel had split a barrel early and begun a fire-up tunnel to draw. The foremost Wights shivered and stood like men in rain waiting for a boat. They had boats no longer. "Bring me a bow," John said, though bows had felt useless in his hands since the fist. Ed passed him one without comment, as if he had expected John to ask for exactly that and had been keeping it warm under his cloak. John knocked an arrow wrapped in oilcloth, lit it from a torch and drew. He aimed not at the tall one but at the mouth of the tunnel high, where the fire thinned. He had shot well as a boy. He shot worse now because everything mattered and too much mattering makes a man clumsy. The arrow went where it should anyway. It struck the lip. Oil wool there had sagged and burned a little and then stopped. Now it caught and twisted and went from wick to sheet. The tall one watched. John had the sense, in that ridiculous way men think, that it tilted its head the smallest bit. Not curiosity. The thing may have been nothing but curiosity given body. He did not know. It turned slowly and walked back into the snow that was its kingdom, and the dead moved with it, flowing, obedient as stampeding sheep. The horn sounded once more and then not again. They did not come for 2 days. Those days were gifts wrapped in rags. John used them. He slept for a whole hour and remembered each minute of it. He wrote 3 letters and threw away 2 because they were to people he could not send a letter to. He walked the top of the wall with Ghost and watched the world below and believed for a foolish breath that sight was enough to make the world's danger smaller. He stood with Eamon and Sam and Othel and Tormund, and they were quiet in a way that was not hopeless. "Your tunnel," Tormund said on the second of those 2 days, poking it with a thick finger as if it were a horse that might bite. "It is a good trick. Bears love caves. They like to sleep in them and kill in them. I have watched bears let a herd of deer run into a cut in a hillside and then knock the snow down at the mouth. The deer thrash and break their legs and then the bear eats. You are a good bear, Crow." "I never wanted to be a bear," John said. "Too late," Tormund said, "with the mercy of men who know you cannot choose what beast you are when winter decides to use you." When the others came again, they came not with timbers or ice grown to blades, not with quiet or patience, but with speed. The dead ran. John had not seen them run. They had shuffled, pushed, crawled. Now they ran. The sound was like sleet turned to hail. They ran into the tunnel's mouth and the front rank fell and the second climbed and the third pushed and the fourth. Othel's men cut the wedges like a butcher cuts meat when the pot calls. The roof fell in slabs and the fire leapt and the cold shoved and the fire shoved back. The dead ran anyway. Their joints did not work right and still they ran. When they hit flame they burst and kept coming. It was a night of little sense and horrible logic, which is to say it was a night like many but more so. In the rush, where the third gallery should have fallen in a while and did not, a path opened. The cold poured down it, not as a lord now but as a flood. The foremost others moved into the tunnel's lips, only a hand's breadth, only a courtesy. It was enough. The fire near their feet went thin as old cloth. Men fell back, not because of orders but because their bodies could not make themselves be where they were. John found the dragonglass spear in the mess he kept for himself and did not remember putting it there. He had a memory of Sam's hands and Leathers's grin. Ghost sprang forward with the logic of a wolf and then stopped because Ghost was not a fool, and that made John proud and sick at once. The tall other came to the mouth again, less distance now between him and the heat. He lifted his lance with slow relish. If he pushed, he could pin a man through the heart into the wooden beam and the man would freeze with his own blood. If he pushed, John would have to watch his own ideas of bravery die. Instead, the other turned the lance sideways, rested it against the doorpost of ice, and listened. The sound of the trap, the wood, the heat, the cold, made a noise like a song played too fast in a room with bad corners. John felt the other learning the song, tasting the way it was put together. Hatred burst in him for that theft. These were theirs, their tricks, their foolishness. You did not walk into a man's house and make his board creak and then leave him ashamed of his floor. No more, John said to himself or to the world. He had no memory of climbing the braces. He found himself above the mouth, on the ledge that men used to stack tools they would need quickly and never did, because needing quickly made you forget where you put what you needed. He crouched and lifted the largest iron hook they had, used for hauling casks. It had a barb like a boar's tusk, and he did not know if he had the strength to throw it. He did not think. He let his body do as if it belonged to someone braver. The hook went not at the tall other. He did not insult the thing by pretending iron would care for it. He threw instead across and down at the ropes that held the last wedge. If he could bring the last roof down now, unexpected, the shock and heat might shove the cold back from the mouth like a rude hand. The hook struck and bit and held because the rope was old and fat. Ed was there suddenly, because of course he was, and took the rope and wrapped it around his arm twice and leaned in the same direction John did. Leathers put his hands on the rope behind Ed and leaned too. One, outside in the yard, saw and understood and reached, and with one huge finger he hooked the rope and pulled with care like a man picking a splinter out of a child's toe. The wedge went. The roof fell. Not exactly where they meant, but near enough, and the heat that ran up the tunnel was not new, but it came from a new angle, and that mattered. It hit the mouth straight. The other who had come for their song stepped back as if a thought had hurt him. His armor whitened with frost that was not his. The eyes did not flare because they did not need to. He turned away stiffly and walked back into the winter that loved him. The dead faltered. That was enough. They held again. Winter returned to its patience, and the watch learned a little more speed. For a long while after, the tunnels were quiet, except for the noises of men doing men's work and the sound that old ice makes when it is promised both love and violence. The trap became less a gambit and more a habit. It did not feel clever. Felt like farther breathing. One morning, when the light behind the clouds was the color of the inside of a bone, a raven returned to the rookery with a ribbon of yellow linen tied round its ankle instead of the usual black. It meant Eastwatch, and Sam's hands shook when he took it and read what its leg carried. He ran to John, breathless and terrified in a way that meant he brought news that was a door and not a wall. "Ships," he said. "Real ships. Men on them. Masts. Not trees but ships. They brought fire with them. Not wildfire, don't look at me like that. Oil and tar and rope and torches. They say the ice is thick as old wood and they set it burning. Eastwatch holds. The others won't tread on fire there. If they don't break the wall proper, they'll have to go around by way of patience, and we're all to be patient back." "Stannis," John said. His feelings about that name were a man in winter given a tangerine he had not earned. "No," Sam said. "Fishermen. Lord's men too, from White Harbor and Gulltown, it says. But fishermen mostly. They lit it and laughed. Men laugh, John. It's in the letter. I can show you that line." John laughed then, a small laugh, and it felt like a sin. Felt like relief as sharp and soft as onions in stew. He clapped Sam's shoulder hard enough to bruise because the world needed bruises that were not made by ice. He went with him to Maester Eamon and kissed the old man's forehead and felt the heat in him and was grateful for that, too. They would not win. Not here. Not now. Winning was a wrong word. But they would not lose yet. The tunnels had taught the dead that living things could break what was already broken and make a weapon of the breaking. The dead had taught the watch that patience had another name: stubbornness. Men had much of it. They stored it under their beds with old boots and rats' nests. They gave it to each other like bread. Time passed. The trap came down day after day, and some days it did not have to. Some days the tunnel sang instead of screaming. John walked its length and put his hand on the places that had fallen and been mended and fallen again. He thought of Winterfell's crypts, stacked with men and memory, and wondered if the wall envied such neatness. Ghost lay across the mouth sometimes like a white bar, and the dead stopped there without knowing why and then went on because they had no why to begin with. Bowen Marsh came to John one evening with a face like a man about to apologize for telling you that you had a beautiful child and he had sold it. He did not apologize. He asked, in his orderly way, about bacon and beans and how many candles were left and whether candles mattered when the moon was bright with its own light. John answered, they were not friends. They were not enemies. They were two men in a winter that had less room for enemies than it pretended. Your tunnels, Bowen said at last, grudging and honest. They have not killed us. They may keep from killing us a while longer. I am sorry No, John said. Don't be. You were right to fear for the wall. We cut it. It bleeds differently now. That is not a small thing. Fear, Bowen said, and rubbed his face as if trying to warm it. All this time I thought I was not the man for fear, and here I am with my boots full of it. We all are, John said. We'll empty them later. They worked the trap again the next week when the dead brought new animals. Deer, wolves, once a bear with half its face burned away. John did not ask the world to explain. It had explained everything that mattered long ago, and men had not learned it then. He stepped into the tunnel with his men and laid his hand on a brace and closed his eyes and heard the old music, the old pain, the scaffold and the harp and the sword, and he thought, let my hand be steady on the beam, let my breath count. Let me be a door when doors are needed and a wall when walls are needed and a man when men are needed. The wall answered him like a friend who cannot keep from telling the truth even when you would rather hear a lie. Creaked and sighed and said, in its way, perhaps. He smiled and went back to work. Outside, winter breathed under its green banners. The tunnel waited. The dead waited. The living did not wait. They brewed new pitch and cut new wedges and sharpened hooks and counted men. When the next horn sounded, he was already at the mouth, Ed at his shoulder, Leathers a pace ahead, Sam behind with one hand on his little knife as if that made any sense at all. Ghost's eyes were chips of red glass set in milk and blood. The dead came. The trap was ready. It would always be ready now until timber gave out or men did. That was the lesson of every castle since men built them. He raised his hand and let it fall. The knives bit ropes. The wedges leaped. The roof descended like judgment and mercy both. The fire thickened and climbed. The cold pressed its face to the door and smiled its empty smile. John smiled back, without joy and without surrender, and the wall sang, and the song went on.